They told us about the fall of man, the catastrophic moment humanity broke the world. We know the immediate agonizing consequences: pain in labor, toil in the fields, and the closing of Eden's gate forever. They told us that the consequence of the first sin was the first murder when Cain rose up to strike Abel down. The penalty was clear exile, wandering a life separated from God's presence. But here is the greatest consequence, the one that forces us to question everything we thought we knew: human survival. When Cain fled into the land of Nod, how did the human race continue? Who was there to ensure our legacy didn't end with a single blood-soaked family? Genesis offers a silent, startling sentence, leaving a hole in history. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Wait, his wife? Who was this woman who stepped out of the shadows of the cursed earth and became the mother of a new civilization? Were there other people outside the garden? Were there women unnamed and unrecorded waiting in the wilderness? Or did the Bible simply leave out something vital? A truth ancient writers once knew, but modern readers forgot. Today we're venturing into the void of the first exile, to uncover the identity of the woman erased from history. To understand the mystery of Cain's wife, we must first truly grasp the desolation of the world east of Eden. Adam and Eve were not simply cast out. They were thrust into a world diametrically opposed to the paradise they knew. The garden was self-sustaining. The wilderness demanded blood and sweat. This was the foundation of the first family: two parents burdened by sin, and two sons who represented humanity's conflicted future. Cain, the elder, inherited the earth's curse, his hands perpetually stained by the labor of tilling an unyielding soil. Abel, the younger, found peace in tending the flocks, a shepherd gentle in his calling. The inevitable tragedy came not from outsiders, but from within that tiny circle. The fire of jealousy, fueled by God's preferential acceptance of Abel's sacrifice, led to the world's first and most defining act of violence. The ground, already cursed, received the first human blood. God's judgment was swift and absolute. Cain was condemned to be a fugitive, a perpetual wanderer. Terrified, he cried out that anyone who found him would kill him, recognizing that even then, life existed beyond his immediate family unit. God placed a mark on him, a sign of mercy in judgment, and Cain fled. He went into the land of Nod, literally meaning the land of wandering, eastward from Eden. And it is here, in the darkest, most desolate corner of the ancient world, that the single unexplained sentence appears: Cain knew his wife. Cain's flight into Nod is not just a geographical shift. It marks the greatest demographic dilemma in the early Genesis narrative. Think about the scope of the problem. The entire human population has been reduced to three individuals: Adam, Eve, and the cursed fugitive Cain. Abel is dead. Yet the text doesn't hesitate. It gives us a chillingly concise detail: Cain established himself in a barren land, and he knew his wife. This isn't a mere inconsistency. It's a narrative black hole that swallows the common reader's logic. The immediate rational solution, that there must have been other people created elsewhere, is the easiest path, but it fundamentally challenges the very premise of Genesis, which anchors the entire human story to Adam and Eve's single union. If the Bible is a complete record, why the silence? This isn't about an obscure lineage or a minor prophet. This is the mother of all civilization, the woman who birthed the first child outside of God's direct presence, the woman who laid the foundation for the city of Enoch. Her name, her origin, her very existence is deliberately hidden. For centuries, this void has been the rallying cry of skeptics, the question mark wielded against the faith. But for those dedicated to serious biblical mystery, that silence isn't a mistake, it's an invitation. It suggests the answer was not forgotten by ancient writers, but rather intentionally omitted from the central canonized text. The scribes of the primary narrative, focused fiercely on the holy line that leads to the Messiah, had no need for the mother of the cursed lineage. To find her, we must look beyond the familiar pages and venture into the dark margins of the earliest texts, the fragments and forgotten volumes that once formed the complete library of the ancient world. When the primary text, the bedrock of our understanding, presents a deliberate silence, we must become archaeological detectives, dusting off the documents that the mainstream story tried to bury. Our search for Cain's wife cannot remain within the bounds of the standard Bible. It must leap into the ancient archives. Our critical piece of evidence comes from an extraordinary source, the Book of Jubilees. This isn't just a marginal or obscure manuscript. It is a profound, detailed, and highly influential retelling of the history of creation, written from a unique ancient perspective. Jubilees holds immense credibility because it wasn't merely read by a small cult. It was a celebrated authoritative text among the early believers. Its importance is underscored by its preservation. It was meticulously guarded by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church for millennia. And even more significantly, multiple copies were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls, confirming its widespread acceptance and reverence in ancient Jewish life before the time of Christ. This text functions as the essential historical bridge, filling the crucial silences left by the streamlined narrative of Genesis. And within its chronological framework, which divides history into Jubilee cycles, we find the clear, decisive answer. The text moves past the sacrifices of Cain and Abel, past the murder, and past the sentence of exile, offering a direct resolution to the age-old question. The Book of Jubilees states simply and absolutely, "And Cain took Awan, his sister, to be his wife, and she bore him Enoch." Awan, the forgotten name, the sister who walked with the cursed brother into the wilderness, emerges from the shadows. The mystery is solved not by speculation, but by the retrieval of an ancient documented memory that history tried to lock away. Here is where the ancient text demands courage from the modern reader. The revelation that Cain's wife was Awan, his full-blooded sister-daughter of Adam and Eve, is undeniably unsettling. Yet this truth, which causes modern theological discomfort, was the only logical and necessary conclusion for the ancient world. They understood a fundamental premise we often forget. The entire human species was by definition confined to the genetic pool of two parents. There were no others. The question then shifts from who was she to why was this permissible? The key lies in the concept of primal purity. Early Jewish thought viewed the first generations as being in a state of genetic perfection. The stringent laws against incest and close-kin marriage, codified centuries later under Moses, were established precisely because the world had degenerated. The human genome was no longer pristine and genetic. Risk had become too high. But in the land of Nod, the bloodline was considered untouched. Marrying a sibling was not a choice of transgression, but a stark, uncompromising act of divine necessity. It was the initial challenging step in fulfilling the very first command given to humanity in Eden Peru Urvu: be fruitful and multiply. Without Awan's union with Cain, the family line would have immediately ended. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus cemented this logic, clarifying that Adam and Eve produced many other children, and that humanity was literally populated by these early sibling unions, with Awan being the first documented bridge for the cursed line to survive. If Awan's identity was once common knowledge, why was her name silenced in the most widely accepted biblical texts? The disappearance of Awan is not an accident of history. It is an editorial decision. We can pinpoint three primary motivations for this deliberate omission. First, the core purpose of Genesis was to establish the holy lineage. The sacred narrative traces the thread from Adam to Seth, through Noah, Abraham, and eventually to Christ. Cain's line, the children of men who built the first cities, was destined for destruction in the flood. To streamline the narrative and preserve the sanctity of the messianic thread, the chroniclers chose to focus solely on the necessary male descendants, relegating the mother of the cursed line to the margins. Second, The name was likely erased to avoid theological discomfort for later generations. By the time of Moses, centuries after the events in Nod, God had established strict laws forbidding the marriage of siblings. To explicitly name Awan as Cain's sister would force later readers to confront a time when the law of God had not yet evolved a raw early world where divine necessity trumped later moral codes. The scribes, perhaps out of reverence and caution, allowed the name to fade, preserving the clarity of the later Mosaic law at the expense of historical detail. Awan's story is not a footnote of sin, but an epic of survival and foundation. She is the bridge between the paradise Adam and Eve lost and the harsh-built world that followed. When she joined Cain in the land of Nod, their union resulted in the birth of Enoch, the first child born outside the direct presence of God. This act signaled humanity's resilience. Cain, the marked fugitive, used his engineering skills, the very calloused hands that tilled the cursed soil, to build a lasting tribute to his son, the city of Enoch. It is one of Scripture's great ironies that the birthplace of human culture and industry sprung from the line of the murderer. Awan, the forgotten mother, was the progenitor of civilization. Her descendants, though part of the cursed lineage, became the great innovators Jabal, the father of all who dwell in tents and keep cattle; Jubal, the father of all who play the harp and flute; and Tubal-Cain, the master of bronze and iron. Through Awan's survival and subsequent lineage, we see a profound paradox. Even in judgment, God allows creation to bloom. From the soil marked by Abel's blood came the arts, the music, and the architecture that would define early human progress. Awan's legacy is not just her name, but the very first spark of human endurance and ingenuity. The story of Awan is the ultimate lesson in biblical interpretation. It shows us that what seems to be a frustrating gap in the canon is in fact an echo of a deeper truth preserved in the margins of history. Awan was not an alien or an outsider. She was a sibling, a necessary figure who fulfilled the divine command to build a new world out of the ashes of the old. She became the silent witness to humanity's second beginning. Her legacy reminds us that God's grace and mercy are at work even in the midst of the harshest judgment. Though Cain was cursed to wander, he was not abandoned. He was given a wife, a family, and a means to begin again. Awan represents hope after punishment, life after death, and creation after the fall. So when you read that simple, jarring verse in Genesis, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch," remember the woman whose name was intentionally lost, but whose story breathes life into the greatest mystery of survival. The secrets of the Bible are often found not in what was written, but in what was left unspoken by the ancient scribes.